Okay, so today we're going to continue talking basically about studies that estimate the value of statistical life. So there's two studies that we're looking at. There's this speed limit study, which we'll finish up very shortly here. And then there is another study we'll talk about, which is this cancer cluster study that I think I kind of alluded to at various points in the class. But that's also used to, the goal of that study is also to study the value of statistical life. Or actually, in that case, it's like the value of a statistical case of leukemia. So last time we left off, we were basically just going over how it is that these researchers, Ashenfelter and Greenstone, are trying to estimate the effect of raising speed limits on total traffic fatalities or on total highway fatalities. And the conclusion was essentially that in states that raised their speed limits on these rural interstate highways, they saw their fatalities go up by 36% relative to states that did not increase their speed limits on these rural interstate highways when they had a chance to do so in 1987. So that sort of pins down one of the two components that we need in order to calculate the value of statistical life. So remember, this formula will keep coming up, especially on the problem set and on the exam. You'll need to apply it. So the VSL is basically calculated by taking the change in willingness to pay or willingness to accept, so this is in dollars, and dividing by the change in risk. This is willingness to pay to avoid a certain amount of risk, or willingness to accept in order to take on a certain amount of risk. And so what they're doing here is basically like this whole exercise of figuring out how much fatalities increase when you increase the speed limit. What that's doing is it's trying to estimate this denominator here. It's going to give them how much risk increases when the policy changes. But then the next thing they need to do, of course, is estimate the numerator. So to get the numerator, they basically need to figure out what like the benefits or the time savings of raising the speed limit are. So they run through the same type of regressions that they did before, but now instead of having fatalities as the outcome or the left-hand side variable in those regressions, they have basically like average speeds on these highways. And what they find is that there is a significant effect on travel time on these rural interstate highways that have their speed limits raised. So travel time decreases by about 4%, which I think corresponds to something like about like 2 or 2.5 miles an hour, something like that on average in terms of the increase in speeds. And you can see that's highly significant in the sense that the t-statistic is 6, so that's much greater than the rule of thumb that it needs to be greater than 2. And they can also do these sort of same types of like falsification tests that we discussed for looking at the change in fatalities. So they have these two groups of roads that even in states where the speed limits are raised, these roads are not affected by the increase in speed limits because they're not allowed, states aren't allowed to raise speed limits except for this particular type of road, which is a rural interstate. So they look at travel time on urban interstates where even in the quote-unquote treated states, there is no increase in the speed limit. And they find reassuringly here that there doesn't appear to be any significant change in travel time. So travel time does drop by 1% there, but it's not statistically insignificant. So it's most likely just due to statistical noise rather than representing a true effect. And they also look at the effect of the speed limit change on travel time for rural arterials, which also, again, these roads are not having their speed limits changed alongside the speed limit change for those rural interstates. So we expect to have no effect there, or expect to observe no effect there if research design is working. And indeed, that's what you see. There's a 0% change there, which of course has a t-statistic of 0. So the sort of ultimate takeaway or conclusion here is that these states that raise their speed limits are trading off a 36% increase in fatality rates for a 4% reduction in travel times. So if we have this formula for the value of statistical life, which says that we're going to take the marginal willingness to accept for the risk increase and divide it by the amount of the risk increase, then what that works out to is that if you like actually go into the data and figure out the numbers here, so I gave you like the percentage changes, but if you were to look at the actual data, you can figure out what the number of fatalities and the number of hours saved are. It turns out that it's basically 497 million hours of time savings in the numerator, and then almost 5,200 extra fatalities in the denominator. So the one sort of last thing that you need to do, remember this, we want this change in willingness to pay or willingness to accept to be in dollar terms, and right now we have it in like travel time terms. So the last thing you have to do is convert from travel time to dollars, and so that conversion itself is not without controversy because we don't know exactly how much people value their time. There are various ways to try to gauge how people value their time, and one way is to sort of look at the opportunity cost of how they spend that time. So they could be working and earning some wage, and then in some hours they do work, but on margin they're basically indifferent between working and not working, in theory, according to economic theory at least. And so if you believe that, then on the margin, 1 hour of leisure is going to be valued at like the average wage, or for an average person will be valued at the average wage, which in their sample turns out to be like $12.33 per hour. So if you apply that value of time, then you find that basically the states are trading off $6.1 billion of time savings in the numerator there for about 5,200 extra fatalities in the denominator there. So once you do that calculation, you get a VSL of $1.2 million. And they actually have, they have various specifications, like sometimes they're adding some control variables and others and so forth. So things vary a little bit, but they're all pretty close. So the range is basically from a low of about $1.1 million to a high of about $1.5 million, depending on which specification they compare.
I see the 1233 for like the average wage for
right.
What about like just looking at the average wage of like the person fatalities?
Of the people who actually end up like dying on the roadway. That's an interesting idea. I don't think that the data actually would tell them that, because I mean I myself have like worked with the traffic fatality data for other projects, and you get pretty good sort of demographic information on people, like their age and race and so forth, but I don't think you get like education, and certainly you don't get like what their wages were. So it would be hard to figure out like to get a data source that would be able to match that, you'd be able to link basically to those fatalities. I think your idea definitely has merit in the sense that you could certainly imagine like trying to at least figure out what the population of like highway drivers or frequent highway drivers is, because you might think that would be somewhat different than just the general population, and figure out like what their wage is. I don't know that they really pursued that. The other thing is that. So the other thing I should say is that using the average wage, using the wage, the hourly wage as the value of time is people. Not everybody would accept that as being the actual value of time. And there's sort of several reasons for that. But I think two main ones are that first of all, when you look at so there have been some experiments. Like ideally, what you'd like to do is figure out exactly how much somebody was willing to pay to travel faster with no sort of change in risk or anything else like that. And there are these like toll lane experiments, which more or less get at that. Like look at how much people are willing to pay for like express toll lanes when there's a traffic jam, so they can bypass the jam. And those experiments I think do find pretty high values of travel time. So like roughly similar to what people's wages are. So that would indicate that maybe this is correct. But on the other hand, it's also the case that in transportation literature, it seems like people obviously want to save time, but what they really don't like is sitting in traffic. And so sort of like traveling at 60 versus 50, so they do prefer to travel at 60 and get there somewhat faster than if they travel at 50. But sort of 10 minutes of savings that accrue from that are not valued as much, and that's what we're looking at here. Those aren't valued as much as sort of 10 minutes of savings that accrue from just avoiding some sort of gridlock traffic jam altogether, because people really sort of dislike, it seems, sitting in traffic itself. So that's one thing to consider. The other thing to consider is, so I motivated the use of the average wage as being valid in the sense that on the margin, people don't work like 168 hours a week, and they don't work 0 hours a week. So in theory, they're working at they're like basically working up until the point at which the marginal utility or the marginal value of leisure is equal to the wage that they earn, and that's the point at which they're basically indifferent between increasing or decreasing their working hours. So, and some labor economists will actually say that seems to be true. That people do actually have the ability to control how many hours they work, and they are making these choices at the margin. But it's also true that there are a lot of jobs where it's basically you work 40 hours a week, and it's not really up to the individual to sort of choose to work like 38 or 46 or 50 or 30. And so to the extent that people are working 40 hours a week just because the job says they have to work 40 hours a week, then we can't really envision that as coming from some sort of trade-off where they're optimizing exactly like how much their leisure time is worth versus how much they're getting paid, and choosing a point at which the marginal value of leisure is exactly equal to the wage that they get paid. Okay, so certainly there's issues with the valuation of the time savings, but I think that the overriding issue with the study is that it's not clear that the lawmakers really believe that fatality risks were this high. So this $1 million number that I showed you, that's actually like at the lower end of most of the VSL numbers in the literature. So if you remember like the summary article that we discussed earlier, where they're summarizing all these different studies, the VSLs that came from those studies range from like maybe about the high, like close to 1 million, like 700, 800,000 sort of was like the low end, and then they were ranging up to like 10 to 20 million. And so sort of a central estimate in that literature I think would be more around 5 million, and what they're finding here is closer to 1 million. So that might make you a little bit concerned about sort of the numbers that are actually going into this VSL calculation here. And I think that the main issue, as I said, is that I doubt that the lawmakers expected fatalities to increase by as much as they did when they raised the speed limit to 65 miles an hour. So personally speaking, if I hadn't seen the study, the increase in fatalities was larger than I would have expected, and you're getting a 4% increase in speed. So, but fatalities are increasing by 36%, so that's sort of like an elasticity of 9 or something like that, right? Like a 1% change in speed is resulting in a 9% increase in fatalities. So that seems pretty high. And it's not clear to me how lawmakers would have known the risks prior to this study. So the entire the whole idea behind the study is that these lawmakers, these legislators, actually know what the risk is, what the change in fatalities is going to be from increasing the speed limit. And in their heads, then they're sort of doing this like trade-off where they're optimizing how much the risk they're willing to take, or how much risk they think the public is willing to take, versus how much the public values these time savings. And so you might first of all be kind of skeptical, like Karen has looked very skeptical here, that lawmakers are actually sort of like behaving in that way as opposed to just behaving in ways that try to maximize the number of votes they get, which may or may not correspond to making these sorts of calculations that I just described. But even if you were willing to accept that that's kind of the calculation they were doing in their head, it's still not clear exactly where they would have gotten this basic denominator from, like how they would have known exactly how much fatalities would increase. And in particular, like if the lawmakers already know that, they already know the denominator, then presumably like everybody knows the denominator. It's not like lawmakers have some special access to data that nobody else can see. And if everybody already knows it, then why are researchers going and like estimating it to begin with? So they basically try to kind of like defend this this idea by showing that lawmakers were informed regarding the risks, and that many studies previously generated similar estimates. If that's true, then I'm not quite sure why they generated new estimates. And I don't actually think it's the case that the previous studies gave like the same estimates that they had. So, for example, there was a National Research Council study that was published before this had happened, which said that the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit saved about 3,000 to 5,000 people per year. But what they find is that essentially increasing the speed limits increases lives lost by about 1,000 per year. And that's for less than 50% of the states, and it's only on highways that account for about 1 in 7 interstate or rural arterial fatalities. So on the one hand, this 1,000 number is about 4 times less than this 3,000 to 5,000 number. But on the other hand, this NRC, the National Research Council study, is basically analyzing or trying to analyze the effect of a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit on all roads. And this study is only looking at roads that basically involve like a fraction of the states, because remember there were a lot of states where they didn't get data for that. So they only had about like half the states. And then it's also looking at like a very specific type of highway, not like every highway in the state, but rather just these rural interstate highways. So if you kind of take these two numbers of 50% and the 7 times and say like, okay, well, let's then think about scaling up this effect to what would happen if we raised speed limits 100% of the states and on all the roads, not just on the rural interstates. What you might find is the overall effect would be something like 14,000 lives saved per year or more. So that's like a very different number than this NRC number, which said maybe 3,000 to 5,000 lives saved per year. So I just want to do like a couple of quick group exercises now with the VSL. Again, this is something that's going to show up on the exam, or one of the exams for sure, basically. So it's definitely something you want to be comfortable with doing. So the first question I want you guys to think about is basically, let's assume that the lawmakers believe that this 55-mile-an-hour speed limit would save 3,500 people per year. So let's say that they're operating off these NRC estimates, and just to make it a little bit easier, let's give a specific number. So let's suppose the lawmakers assume that the 55-mile-an-hour limit saves 3,500 people per year. And let's suppose that Ashenfelter and Greenstone estimated in their study that it actually saves 14,000 per year. So then the question is, if Ashenfelter and Greenstone estimate a VSL of 1.2 million, what's the true VSL? So it should be a number. I mean, at a minimum, it should be like, is it the same, higher, or lower than 1.2 million? But with the information I've given you, you should actually be able to calculate an exact number. So why don't you guys talk about that for a couple minutes, and then I'll get some answers. Yep. The true VSL. So in theory, people are trading off money for risk, basically. And so you would the entire exercise of the study, or what they're trying to do, is basically figure out the rate at which people are willing to trade off risk for money. And so they estimate $1.2 million as being the rate at which people are willing to trade off basically statistical life versus money. But I'm asking, if you basically make those two assumptions, that the lawmakers assume that the speed limit is going to save $3,500 per year, and then they estimate that it actually saves $14,000 per year, then is that 1.2 million? Does that 1.2 million represent the actual trade-off that lawmakers believe they're making, or is the VSL number different than 1.2 million? And if so, what is it? I mean, it's like, in some sense, it's no different than if we're trying to estimate how much you're willing to pay for something. So in this case, the thing you're willing to pay for is a risk reduction. And so we might try to estimate how much you're willing to pay for your banana or something like that, right? But there's a difference. So if we observe the transaction, then we can figure out exactly how much that is. But if we don't observe literally a transaction for that, then we're trying to infer how much in your head. In your head, you have a number. It's I'm willing to pay 70 cents for a banana, but no more. And we're trying to figure out what that number in your head is. They're trying to figure out what the number in the lawmaker's head is. Does that make sense?
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask for a volunteer in 30 seconds. Okay, so is there a group that wants to volunteer their answer? Okay, so 6. You guys kind of get the tiebreaker right now because you're in last place, I think, in terms of points due to your generosity in the public goods game, but otherwise overall good participation. So what's the answer that you guys came up with? Yeah, that's the same answer that I got. And what was your reasoning behind that?
So Angie said VSL is 1.2 million, so we put that into the equation. And
right.
The change in risk is 14,000, and we put an X variable for willing to pay, solve for the X variable, and then take that X variable divided by the 3,500 lives per year, the lawmakers assume, to get the VSL for the lawmakers. Right.
Okay. Yep. So basically, the key here is basically that Ashenfelter and Greenstone are estimating the true effect is 4 times larger than what lawmakers think the effect will be. And so, in their head, the trade-off that's occurring is basically 1/4 the number of lives lost versus 1/4 the risk in the denominator versus what Ashenfelter and Greenstone are estimating the true risk is. So let me also ask, how many people found this this part of the question that said, what is the true VSL? How many people found the terms true VSL to be somewhat confusing? Okay, so several people, and then a number of people, and I bet many people aren't raising their hands. So how many people did not find that to be confusing? Right, so nobody is raising their hands. So I will conclude that the overwhelming majority of you found that to be confusing. And I think that is something that people have trouble with historically. It's all the more confusing, I think, because in this question, the true effect, the actual effect is 14,000 lives per year. And yet to get the true VSL, you basically need to plug in what the false, the wrong effect is. And the reason is that when we're talking about the true VSL, it's not about what will actually happen once the policy gets enacted or once a purchase is made. It's we're trying to measure what people's perceptions are of what will happen and how they're willing to act based on those perceptions. Right. So what we want to do is measure the rate essentially at which people are willing to trade off risk and money, or trade off more money for less risk and vice versa. Or I guess more money for more risk. And so what we need to know is what they think the risk is rather than what the actual risk is. So we're perfectly willing. So the fact, this scenario is basically similar to somebody who might have buyer's remorse or something, right? They think that ex ante they're going to buy a product, and they think maybe that product has certain attributes that they're willing to pay for, and we'd like to know how much they value those attributes. And so we look at how much they are willing to pay for that product, and then they buy and they find out it doesn't actually have all of those attributes. So I guess a very simplistic scenario would be they're going to buy a computer and they think it has a 500 gigabyte hard drive, and so they're willing to pay whatever $600 for it, and then it turns out that in fact it only has 120 gigabyte hard drive. So of course they'd be disappointed ex post, but if we wanted to figure out how much they were willing to, or I guess maybe the computer has many attributes. So I should say they're buying a hard drive itself, right? They think it's 500 gigs, it's actually 125 gigs. So if we look ex post and see, they were willing to pay $100 for this 125 gig hard drive, and so we can back out how much they're willing to pay per gigabyte, that's not actually what they're willing to pay per gigabyte. Right? What they're willing to pay per gigabyte is that dollar, the $50 or $100 they paid divided by how many gigabytes they thought they were getting, not necessarily how much they actually got. So in most cases, you won't have so much of this kind of buyer's remorse, where their perception of the good turns out to be different than what the actual good is, because in most cases, consumer goods aren't that complicated. You can look up the specs online, and in that scenario, the company literally lied to you and how many gigabytes it had, then you'd obviously be able to sue them and so forth. But with things like the VSL, usually what you're actually getting is not so clear. So what the effects of increasing the speed limit are, or how much your fatality risk might change when you buy an airbag or something. That's not something you actually know. You just kind of have some perception in your mind, and that perception might or might not be true. But what we'd like to know, basically what we want to know is what your actual perception is, so we can figure out the rate at which you're willing to trade off risk for money. Would you have a question? Yeah. So that's correct, and you could certainly argue that the lawmakers' own perceptions of how people are willing to trade off risk and money is perhaps not the right one. But what we're saying here is they're not even, if the lawmakers believe it saves $3,500 per year and it actually saves $14,000 per year, then we're not even able to, or we're not correctly measuring how much the lawmakers are valuing the trade-off. Okay.